This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not an offer or solicitation of an offer to buy or sell securities. SNN.Network, SNN Inc., and the Planet MicroCap Podcast and the representatives are not licensed brokers, broker-dealers, market makers, investment bankers, investment advisors, analysts, or underwriters. We do not recommend any companies discussed. We may buy and sell securities in any company mentioned and make profit in the event those securities rise in value. We recommend you consult with a professional investment advisor, broker, or legal counsel before purchasing or selling any securities referenced in this podcast. Welcome to the Planet MicroCap Podcast. I'm your host, Robert Kraft, and thank you all so much for the support and for tuning in. You can follow Planet MicroCap on Twitter at Bobby K. Kraft, BOBBYKKRAFT, and you're listening to episode 200. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to tweet at me or shoot me an email at rkraft@SNNWire.com. And when you do get a chance, if you like what you hear, please rate and review Planet MicroCap on iTunes. It really helps provide feedback for me and spread the microcap message. What can I say? We made it to 200 episodes of the Planet MicroCap Podcast. I'm really at a loss for words here, and I can't believe we're here, since starting the pod back in July 2015. I've had so much fun hosting this podcast, and I'm really excited for what's ahead with Planet MicroCap and the SNN Podcast Network. So thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing your insights, your knowledge, and thank you for all your support. I'm also excited to announce our newest sponsor, Quarter. Quarter's mission is to change the way people look at investor relations and create a completely new bridge between companies and stakeholders. Visit your app store of choice to try it out, and that's spelled Quartr. We're so excited to work with the team over there, and welcome. So we are also about 1 month away from the SNN.Network Canada virtual event happening December 7th through 9, 2021. Please go to Canada.SNN.Network to see the list of issuers that will be joining us. Paul Andriola, on behalf of Small Cap Discoveries, and myself, on behalf of SNN.Network, are teaming up again to highlight our neighbors to the north, Canada. In the last 5 to 10 years, Paul and his team have been finding value, creative opportunities, and we're so excited to host an event that encapsulates those opportunities available on the TSX, TSX Ventures, CSC, and NEO. You can expect 3 days of keynotes, educational panels, company presentations, and one-on-one meetings. To register, please go to Canada.SNN.Network and click the register button. We look forward to seeing you all there. Now, for episode 200 of the Planet MicroCap Podcast, I welcome back Ian Cassel and Mike Schellinger, the co-founders of MicroCapClub. For those who don't know, MicroCapClub is the pre-eminent microcap investing forum known for springboarding the careers of some of the best investors we know, not just in microcap, but just in general. And more importantly, has profiled many of the most well-known microcap winners. Ian Cassel was my first ever guest on Planet MicroCap. Mike has been a guest 3 times, and I can't thank them enough for their support of the Planet MicroCap Podcast. MicroCap Club was started in 2011, so I was thrilled we could celebrate both episode 200 and their 10-year anniversary all in one episode. Listen in to hear how MicroCap Club came to be, its evolution, the incredible culture that has been cultivated there, how their investing styles have changed, and much more. So thank you again for tuning into episode 200 of the Planet MicroCap Podcast, and please enjoy my conversation with Ian Cassel and Mike Schellinger. Welcome back, everybody, to the Planet MicroCap Podcast. This is a very special episode for me and our team here. This is episode 200, and I wanted to put something very special together for all of you. And our episode 200 just happened to fall in the same year. And I swear, Ian, Mike, I planned it that way. I would be realized. So, episode 200 happened to fall in the same year as the 10-year anniversary since the founding and launch of MicroCapClub. So why not celebrate 2 big occasions in one podcast? And so joining me right now are the co-founders of MicroCapClub, 2 gentlemen I respect more than anybody can know in microcaps. I've learned so much from both of them. I mean, Ian's been on the pod, I think 3 times. Mike, we're still working on our 3rd appearance. I guess this is technically his 3rd appearance, but either way, guys, thank you so much for joining me today. I really do appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, I figured we'd dig in a little bit because while, within our microcap universe, especially those who are part of MicroCap Club, I bet some of the newer members probably don't know some of the history and how this all started, especially since we haven't had any in-person MicroCap Club leadership summits in the last 2 years. So let's start off with a little backstory. How did you guys meet? And then what was the impetus to then starting MicroCap Club?
Sure, I can lead off. So back when I was getting started as a microcap investor, this would have been the early 2000s. And I think Mike got started a little bit earlier than that. But most of the activity level on microcap companies was on public stock message boards, of like Raging Bull, like Investors Hub, Yahoo Finance to a lesser extent. And it makes sense because most microcaps, especially the smaller ones, are mainly owned by retail investors. And it's just those stock message boards were just places that people would gravitate to have those conversations and discussions. And so, I think probably where I first met Mike was most likely on one of those boards. We were talking about it prior to this and trying to remember if it was Raging Bull or if it was Investors Hub or somewhere else. But, it's likely on one of those message boards how we first met.
Mike, see, I figure Mike remembers the stock that you guys were probably talking about. That was what was that first conversation. I won't ask what it was on here, but I'm sure I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I don't actually remember. I think what happened is that we found ourselves in a number of stocks together. It was like one of us would invest and the other would invest in it. And, we'd see on some message board somewhere that we were both invested in it. And, at some point in time, we decided to talk more in depth, not just on the message boards, offline. And that's how we got to know each other.
Very cool. So then who was the first one to say, all right, let's, clearly there's something here, we realize that there are, a lot of Mike and Ian's going on to Yahoo Finance, Raging Bull, Investors Hub to go and talk on the message boards, get more information, see who else is looking at these similar stocks. What then led to from that to, all right, MicroCap Club, Ian, Mike?
That's all.
I think I think it was like 2 primary drivers that made that decision. Like number one was a personal one. And then also another one was more just how those public message boards that we were both a part of evolved. There's good and bad about public message boards. The good is it's public, you get a lot of views, anybody can view it. The bad is that you get a lot of views and everybody can view it. And, you also get, 95% of the posters not really being value add, to those stock message boards. And there's a lot of just negativity that can take place, on public stock forums. Then on the personal level, I think it was between 2005 and 2009, 2010, I also had my own personal blog that I was running, and I've always been a very concentrated investor. So I was just posting about what I liked and why, over those 4 or 5 years. And just over time, it got such a following that it really began to move the markets and the stocks that I was talking about. And it's great for the ego, but I just also didn't like that either. And so I decided to shut down my personal blog, but also reflecting on a lot of the good people that I met on the public message boards as well. Just thinking, okay, it'd be great if we can kind of combine the both of these things. I enjoy talking about what I like and why, but I also want to kind of keep it private. And I want to, it'd be great to have a forum where you had nothing but experienced microcap investors, talking about what they liked and why. So you had a certain quality level, associated with that, and kept out, a lot of the people that shouldn't be, participating. And so that's kind of how microcapclub.com launched that in 2011. And, slowly but surely we can get into some of those iterations, kind of become what it is today. And, we had our, like you said, 10-year anniversary in July of 2011, which is really hard to believe. And Mike was one of the first members that joined up to MicroCap club at that time, probably late 2011, something like that. Mike joined, and he was a great member from the very beginning. And then he would later come on, a few years after that as a partner, into the company as well, and really build, what MicroCapClub is today.
Very cool. Yeah, no, I think before Paul went on his insane run, Mike was number one for, I think, like 7 years, 8 years, like in a row, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, something.
I don't know how long it was, but it was a while.
Still top five. Okay. That's still pretty good. But Mike, so, you joined in 2011 and then decided to come on as a partner, a couple of years later. What inspired you to do that?
Well, I was looking for, something else to do in addition to investing in the microcap space. And Ian and I started talking, and we went through a couple of different ideas, and eventually it turned down to, I joined up with him in MicroCapClub, and that was also at the point shortly after I joined up. It took us about a year or so, but that we added the subscriber option to MicroCapClub because it was a needed piece for funds and people that weren't in a position to become members to join and follow the discussions in a read-only format.
I'd like to take a quick second to tell you about this episode's sponsor, Quarter. With Quarter, you get frictionless access to conference calls, investor presentations, transcripts, and earnings reports from markets all around the world, straight from your pocket for no cost. Quarter's mission is to change the way people look at investor relations and create a completely new bridge between companies and stakeholders. The first step on this journey is to let you, the user, interact with the company's content while you're listening. Visit your app store of choice and try it out today by searching for Quarter, and that's Quartr. Now back to the show. Very cool. So obviously MicroCapClub has evolved over the years, including criteria for letting members in. But back at that time, what was some of, that initial criteria to let people in? I mean, listen, there wasn't as many microcap investors at that time. So I'm assuming it was being able to at least put like a couple sentences together.
Exactly. Well, that's the hard part about having a private forum to a certain, because you don't have those network effects that naturally take hold if it was public. And so, you're talking about really limiting, your audience, the amount of views you get, but also the amount of participants. And so when I first launched the site in 2011, it was mainly me asking a few people that I knew that were already experienced microcap investors to come on board with me. And I think that's when Mike came on board. And, I think for the first year or two, we also had a referral kind of system. We didn't even have the application process yet. It was just like, hey, I trust you. You're a good investor. Why don't you invite a friend to come join us? And that's how it grew. In fact, it grew really quickly to about 1,000 members in about a year. But the problem was that I saw it was, the people didn't earn the right to get in. And so a lot of them weren't participating, and so over time it was like, what, I would rather have 200 members that are really participating in this forum versus showing 10,000 members when you're just showing a number. It doesn't really mean anything. In addition to that, there needs to be, it's like the carrot to come on board and have conversations with like-minded investors, but there also needs to be a stick to where, you get in. If you're not participating, you need to be kicked out, and so people feel like, kind of both sides of that. And so it took, probably 3 or 4 years to get kind of the application process in place and the systems in place and kind of the pruning of the membership base in place to where, it took 3, 4, 5 years probably until I felt, and probably Mike felt, like we didn't have to engage and be the conversation on a daily basis to keep the discussion going on certain company threads. It took probably 4 or 5 years for that. And, but it did. And luckily, today we have, I think, some of the best microcap investors on the planet, on the forum. We still have, attrition of members, because not only, maybe if people aren't communicative or discuss things, they also gravitate out of the forum because they take an analyst position. They become a fund manager, which might prohibit them from participating. There's lots of reasons why they might move up and out of MicroCap Club. But today it's a really cool ecosystem of kind of like-minded investors, and over time, there's been several other things that we've added to try to add more engagement. We track the performance. I think it's mid 2012, we started company performance, where we would track the company performance of every company that was profiled on our forum and tag that to each member. And then a few years later, we kind of created our member ranking system, which would allow people to then see who the best ranked members are based on the aggregate cumulative gains of the companies they profiled. And it's a pretty simple system. It's like, if you profile a stock at $1, it goes to 2. That's 100% gain. Well, your ranking of points is 100. Likewise, you can bring it back down if you produce losers, in the club. And so it's a real honest assessment, a simple assessment, our member ranking today. And obviously you see Paul Andriola at the top of that with, 20,000 plus points, I think now. And a big reason of that is obviously Expel, which I think is up 20,000, percent. So it kind of makes sense, when you think about that. And you see there's power laws present, obviously, in MicroCap to drive those types of returns in that member ranking. But Mike, is there any other things that we've added along the way that you think, kind of helped get us to where we are?
We added one of the things that was really nice is we added an ability to follow particular companies, because now we have, I forget, it's like 700 plus companies on MicroCap Club, and it allows people to focus on maybe the 4 or 5 that they're invested in or that they're interested in, and they can get automated emails just on posts on those companies. And I think that's helped a lot in terms of, helping people to sort of, go through the forest and find the trees.
I'll add to that as a subscriber. You can follow pretty much anything you want, and you get notified in your email. You get notified anytime there's a new post on that thread, or new discussion, or actually if there's doing a commercial for MicroCap Club right now. And anybody that you follow, like if I follow Ian, anytime he posts something, I would get a notification in my email as well. So I thought those are really cool features as well. But Mike, one question I wanted to come to you on was, there's clearly this incredible culture that you guys have cultivated here on MicroCap Club. Tell us a little bit about, what that culture is, and maybe some of the what you've needed to do in order to maintain that culture.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that personally for me, I'm proudest and happiest about with MicroCap Club, is Ian and I's experience, before MicroCap Club, is a lot of these message boards, they would devolve into fighting. And, Ian and I didn't really want to have to deal with a lot of that. So, a big part of that, I think, is our application process. People have to invest, a fair amount of time to apply, become a member. And there's this congeniality on MicroCap Club that I've never seen anywhere else. Ian and I can probably count on, a couple of hands the times we've had to intervene and say, hey, you guys cool it. And so it's a very collaborative environment. I think it's also because of the microcap space. The microcap space is huge. And it's something that no one person can really go and, learn about every company in the space and know everything about all those companies. So, there's this aspect of wanting to help each other that's there in MicroCap Club. And I think it's really helped us that, and helped everybody that's participated in the ecosystem of, getting the benefit of multiple minds, multiple eyes looking at, all these companies.
Absolutely. Ian, you want to add anything to that?
Well, and I think one of the things that, because most of these small, great companies that hopefully become great, they're first discovered by retail investors. And a lot of times it's a smaller retail investor. And so it's important, if we want to create a community of investors that find these great companies early, it was important that we had a membership system and an application process that didn't force them to actually pay a fee, because a lot of times it is that college student that's a sophomore that, has 28 hours a day to look and find one of these companies that ends up discovering it. And, it was important that whether it was a person like that or it was somebody managing a $1 billion, fund, that they would be on the same level, when they and how they got in. So it doesn't matter if you're worth $1 billion or you have $2,000 in the bank. Both those individuals have to get in and become a member the exact same way. And so everybody's kind of on an equal playing field.
Yeah. Or a sophomore in high school. That shout out to Michael Liu right there.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, another interesting pattern that I've seen with MicroCap Club over the years, and I think this term has probably taken a whole new meaning in the last 18 months for, stocks that aren't microcaps, this idea of cult stocks, because there's a few names within microcaps that are maybe first profiled on there that almost get this like cult-like status. I mean, you talked about Expel. I mean, I think we can all agree over the last 3-4 years before it really took off, like that had that cult-like status around it because everybody was just like, they saw the numbers, they saw who was profiling, and then, of course they performed. And the next thing you know, it was in the next stratosphere. So can you talk about that kind of phenomenon as well as like being basically kind of creating the culture around, and facilitating some of these microcap cult names that folks might not have heard of?
Mike, do you want to take
that? Well, I think that Ian and I would say we're not looking to create cult stocks. We it just happens. A lot of people gravitate toward, especially if they perform well, people are going to gravitate towards them. And so, that's sort of kind of what happens on message boards in general. And a microcap club in particular, it does happen. But, Ian and I will sometimes even step in when it gets a little bit too rah, to try to keep people being rational because, we want to facilitate people being good investors, and that's part of running MicroCap Club.
Well, and it's important to also it's easy to pick on Expel, but that is an anomaly. For every company that has a cult following that does an Expel type move, there's 100 others that have a cult like following that went down. So it's important to kind of have a rational mindset. And it's also why, some of the best performing there's quite a few winners on MicroCap Club that didn't have much discussion, either, so it's something that Mike and I think about all the time is, oh, wow, here's a company that was up, 500% this year. And there was, 2 posts on it, why was that happening? And so trying to bring some of those names back to the forefront of people's minds so we can get discussion going on them, because there's lots of microcaps out there, as Bobby, it's like there's 20,000 stocks in North America, 10,000 of them are microcaps. So there's quite a few to comb through. And I'm always amazed every day. I've been doing this for 20 years, Mike, even longer. Just, it's like that old commercial right before your time, maybe not Bobby, but, like you've reached the end of the internet. I keep on thinking like, oh, I'm never going to find another great idea again. Then all of a sudden you stumble upon one. And it's the same thing with MicroCap as well. And it's probably one of the places too, how MicroCap Club has evolved is, I would say for the first 6 years of MicroCap Club's existence, it was predominantly the United States, and then it evolved up to Canada. And just in the last, I would say 2-3 years, a lot more companies profiled in Europe and also in Australia. And so it's becoming more and more important for any microcap investor, if they have the ability and know-how, to not limit yourself to your own geography, because you can find really great companies, even global companies that are just traded on another exchange somewhere. And so we're starting to facilitate and have some really active discussions on some kind of international microcaps as well, which is pretty exciting.
Don't worry. I'm already expecting, in 2 years there's going to be some metaverse threads. Maybe some crypto that trade there, or somehow some new exchange pops up that you can only access when you're actually in your own avatar. We can go in. We can go in on
Yeah,
this.
we could.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, one thing I also, really love about MicroCap Club that I bet a lot of people probably just assume is that I think most probably think like, okay, they're only probably looking at tech names or maybe some consumer names in there, revenue generating and stuff like that. But there's actually quite a few profiled that are, junior mining or biotech names. So I'd love for you guys to speak to when it comes to when you're looking at applying to be in MicroCap Club, how you don't discriminate against any kind of sectors or anything like that, or applications that are profiling some of these sectors. Mike.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We don't. We just look for a good write-up that does a good job of explaining the company, explaining the thesis, and we think ultimately has a good chance of being successful. So that's kind of what we're looking for. And it's, Ian and I screen through the ideas that come in first, and we send the good ones off for the members to vote on. And then the members decide what gets in and what doesn't.
Yeah. And I would say that there's, I think maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, I mean, we would get maybe 5 applications a month. And, lately we've been getting 20 to 25 applications a month from folks just wanting to get in, and so a big chunk of our idea flow, also comes from that application process, which is pretty unique. And I would say maybe to add something to what Mike said too, there's definitely extra credit. Maybe extra credit's the wrong word, but you definitely get bonus points if there's fundamental drivers to the thesis, versus if it's just a story stock, when you apply to get in.
Right. Yeah. Cause I mean, it's tough too, because I'm sure as part of you're going through the application and you're looking at this, and you're like, all right, I got to make sure that, I'm sure you have your checks to make sure that, all right, this looks like a good application. They're explaining the company, they're explaining their thesis in a cogent way, but then you have to go in and check like, all right, is this like is this a promotion? Like, has this been a promoted stock? I'm sure you check for all that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. We try to do our best to screen out sort of the obvious ones that have those types of red flags, because the members that are going to be voting on it are smart as well. We want to push ideas, a bulk of the good ideas that we think merit their time to even read the application, to them.
All right. So you guys have already kind of alluded a little bit to how MicroCap Club has evolved over the years, but what would you say is like the main, couple things that really stand out to you when you look at its evolution? Ian?
I would say, a big turning point was when we launched our subscriber offering. So I think was that 2016, Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah. So 2016. So the club launched in 2011. There was no revenue generating from it until 2016 when we launched subscribers. And we put a lot of thought into what type of offering we wanted to put together, because we didn't want to destroy the ethos of what we had built up to that point, and so we didn't want it to be, and here's 10 of the best picks, from Ian and Mike, that type of thing. We wanted to create something that just allowed people to kind of why we joined it and started it. It was like, we just wanted you to have the ability to find where the best microcap investors in the planet are, to follow them, and then to come to your own decisions and conclusions on the types of companies that subscriber would want to dive into perhaps more and come to their own decision. And so we put a lot of time and effort into that. And, I think to this day, I think it's worked out really well, and it helped in a lot of ways, because it forced us to think about, how do we get some of the conversations that should be happening to start happening? How do we bring some of our best members to the forefront, with our member ranking, and that's when we launched kind of those features to allow people to kind of see who the best members are of MicroCap Club, to follow those folks, to that type of thing. So a lot of the good things that we are doing now kind of started back in that decision to launch the subscribers, and it's been a great experience, I think, for everybody, because the subscribers that join, that just pay to get view only access, they just have view only access. They're not able to post. So it didn't really, you didn't really feel an impact on the forum itself by all of a sudden having a lot more people, involved, because they could just view the conversations. Mike, did you have anything to add to that?
I think that was really the, sort of the fulcrum point is, all the changes that we did. And it took Ian and I a year to basically, put in all the groundwork to launch the subscriber option, all the additional features that we added to make things easier to follow, to rank the members, and basically to help improve the ecosystem so people could, try to find the best ideas. Because there's a lot of information on MicroCapClub, and one of the biggest challenges in using it is finding the good stuff in the pile of hay.
100%. By the way, we're recording this on Friday, October 29th, so we're going to get a potential new mix-up in the rankings. Any sneak preview? Anybody make any big jumps in October that we should know about?
Well, the day isn't closed yet, the end of the month, so we haven't even looked at it yet.
Yeah.
This is true. So Mike, coming back to you, my next question for you guys is, we talked about how the club itself has evolved, but how about your own personal investing style? Has that changed over the years since launching MicroCapClub?
For me, I think probably it's changed a fair amount, and it hasn't. I think the biggest change is that I'm more of a growth investor and less of a less price sensitive than I probably was then. Just trying to find the really long-term growth, which is a challenge in the microcap space. It's a challenge anywhere, but it's definitely a challenge in the microcap space, but it can be done. And that's probably my biggest change. Apart from spending a lot more time managing MicroCapClub and having less time to actually do investing.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
Ian?
I think for me, it's, I used to be very concentrated, which was literally in 3 ideas. And now I'm in 8 to 10, which is still insanely concentrated by most people's standards. But I would say probably the place where MicroCapClub itself influenced my investing the most is bringing some of those international microcap opportunities to the forefront. When we started getting them in like 3-4 years ago, when I'm saying international, I would say, Australia, Europe, those types of places. And then I'm seeing the types of quality businesses that were microcaps in those jurisdictions. It really got me starting to look in those areas of the world. And so, 4 or 5 years ago, where I was mainly all North American, now, 30-40% of the portfolio is outside North America. And I would say a big part of that is because of the ideas that we were starting to get in MicroCapClub, as applications, and also our members profiling those ideas.
Yeah, I think I remember having the first time I had that same realization was, I think it was the summit like 2 or 3 years ago. It was the first time I met Thomas Bacharach, and some of the stuff that he was looking in overseas in Europe and everything, that was when my mind was like, wow, this is almost like a turning point for me, where I'm finally hearing somebody, not just looking over there, but incredibly passionate about all the opportunities that are out there globally. By the way, shout out to Tom. He just finished, I believe, his last round of chemo.
Yep.
We love you, man. And so just wanted to give him a quick shout out on here. So.
Yeah. Tom's great. He's crushed it. I mean, and Tom looks in some obscure areas. I know he's combed through every public company in Egypt, because he spent like 5 years over there, and so he has kind of an edge because he's been over there for, not now, but he was for 5 years. So yeah, hats off to Tom.
Yeah, we're still trying to figure out how we can invest in this Kyrgyzstani airport. I believe that was after 3 or 4 beers that we really were we're still trying to figure it out. But, if anybody could, it's probably Tom. So my next question for you guys is, there's been a lot of winners that have been profiled in MicroCapClub. In your opinion, why would you say that these top MCC picks were the top performers that they were? Ian, throw to you on that one.
Mike and I were just looking at that list, I think yesterday or earlier today, and I think most of the top performers were companies that just sustained high growth and had a moat, and they just continued to grow and grow and grow. So often, even some of the winners that Mike and I have had over the years, they can win for a certain period of time and then they stop winning. The type of company that would go from $1 to $5 and then back to $1, because a lot of that growth is based on one product or a service that, was almost more of a fad than it was a sustainable business. And so, those companies in that top 20 or top 30 on our list, really have sustained a high quality growth level for a long period of time. I don't know, Mike, if you have anything to add to that.
I would also add that most, but not all of them are profitable. Because that's how you ultimately get, a multiple. I mean, you can get a multiple on revenue, but eventually, a company has to show that they can make a profit. And so those that, make it to the top generally are profitable companies, but not all of them.
I mean, when you looked at that list, were there any where you like, damn, like how did that one get from initial profile to where it is today? And I mean, were you surprised by some of the ones when you reflect on some of those names?
I don't know if there's anything that I reacted like that to. There was a lot of that when I realized that I should have owned them or paid more attention to them.
Yeah,
I would frame it as that.
Yeah. I think I would say the same thing. It's like, wow, we missed that, and there's a few that have gone up with, very few comments on MicroCapClub, but most of them had a lot of discussion in MicroCapClub. But it's like, how did we all miss this, or most of us miss it?
I mean, this is one of the things I envy about you guys, is just being able to have that discipline to really be able to discern what is, investable for yourself and fits your strategy. Because as you said, I mean, these are some of the best microcap investors on the planet, all in one place, commenting and profiling these, a lot of potential winners here. So, I mean, how were you able to mentally be able to be like, all right, this is somebody who I really respect. They've picked a lot of winners, but I'm not going to do that one, when it's a new profile. Because I'm sure all the time you're like, I wish I had an extra couple bucks just to maybe throw at this one. Let's see what happens, because of that. Love to hear your thoughts there.
Well, I think for me, a lot of it is, Ian and I both have our own strategies, and Ian's is different than mine. But I think we're both very disciplined on following our own strategy. And it's the other thing too, is if you buy into a company just based off of what somebody says, it's hard to hold on to that stock without really, buying into a thesis with your own mind. And so, I think for me, and I'll let Ian comment on his own, but I have to believe it the same way the author does, and I may respect the author a lot, but I might not have that same buy-in, and I can't buy into a stock without just having that personal conviction.
I think that's probably a good commonality with a lot of our members, Mike, too, is because these are small companies. A lot of them don't have research coverage, which just is a fancy way of saying that you have to do your own work. There's a lot of these, you can't lean on other people, and so a lot of our members are independently minded type folks. When somebody posts an idea, it's usually not an immediate rah about it. It's, people trying to poke holes in it. Things like that. So it's great. I don't know. It's a really great community because of that. I mean, but also it's very hard. I mean, we have some of the best microcap investors on the planet. And, when I was looking at how many companies have been profiled since 2011, as of our summit, we had 876 companies that were profiled since July of 2011. And when you look at the performance of all of those companies since the day they were profiled to where they closed the end of, I guess it would have been the end of August, but I think 519 or almost 60% had positive returns, which means 40% have gone down. And when you drill down to that even further, I think 255 or almost 30% have doubled or more since they were profiled, which is a statistic that I'm proud of. I mean, that's pretty amazing that 30%, have doubled or more since they were profiled. And because that's almost Well, that is. That's greater than 2 per month, since the club's been around, that have doubled or more that have been profiled. It's pretty wild when you think about it. And then there's around 50 companies that have gone up 500% or more since they were profiled. And then I believe we were up to 25 companies that have gone up 1,000% or more since they were profiled. So 25 out of 876, so we have some of the best investors in the planet on this forum, but it's still hard. It's still a game of power laws or slugging percentage, a lot of times, instead of batting average, because we're right, if you want to call it that, meaning you made a positive return 60% of the time, but it's really about finding those winners, and holding them as long as they're executing.
I mean, that takes me to my next question here, because, by the way, anybody who's not a subscriber or hasn't thought about trying to apply, you just heard the numbers. Like that says it all you need to hear. Like, you should go subscribe if you're at all interested in microcaps. But, that ties into my next question, where we're looking more broadly when we think about microcaps and in the mainstream. I mean, here we have, MicroCapClub, and there's other platforms like it that have been around for a while, obviously MicroCapClub 10 plus years now. Why is microcap still not mainstream? Here we go. Here's a forum. You just heard the numbers. Clearly there's incredible outperformance. Obviously, people doing the work, don't get me wrong, but why is it still not mainstream? And is there any kind of improvements that we can do to the messaging? I'd love to hear your thoughts here. Mike, Ian, who wants to go first?
Well, I think one of the reasons why, it doesn't seem as mainstream is that, you look at Wall Street in general, and you've got funds that are a big part of what Wall Street is. And most of those funds manage more money than can be deployed in the microcap space. So oftentimes they just can't invest in the microcap space. So that, until, the expels of the world grow big enough that they're like, this is a big company now, I can invest in it. And so, that's part of the reason why you don't hear about this on the microcaps on CNBC, because, they're fishing in a different pond than we are. And they have to fish in that different pond because it's not practical, if you have a lot of money to manage, to fish in the microcap pond. However, if you're an individual investor, it's, in my opinion, the best place, if you know what you're doing, to invest, because you're not competing against fund managers that have armies of people that can look at what some of these big names are going to do the next quarter. You're on a much more level, playing field.
Just to add on that, I think another reason why it doesn't have more mainstream, even retail interest is, I think a lot of the times, unfortunately, the way a new investor gets introduced to microcaps is through some advertising or glossy hard mailer they get in the mail or email that says this is the next Amazon and it's going to go to the moon, and unfortunately the first entree is like a pump and dump, and if they do invest into it, they'll lose all their money, and then they'll never come back to this ecosystem again. And usually when I talk to anybody that's new looking at microcaps for the first time, you want to have them at least have a fair shot at a good experience. And so when you look at microcap, around 17% of the companies are profitable. And so I think it's really good, just if you're new, just focus on those 17% that are profitable, because that'll probably alleviate 90% of your pain, to a certain extent. And so I think if we were probably focusing more on the microcaps that had real businesses, instead of, some of the ones that are just story stocks, I think that would bring a lot more eyes and attention in a positive way, to this ecosystem as well. We've had recently, obviously, with the SPAC boom that's been happening and things like that, there's been a lot more interest in smaller companies and small caps, because a lot of times those SPACs are small caps. It might be a little bit larger than microcap. And so it's bringing a lot more interest and retail interest downstream into microcap as well. And I think we felt that, really since the end of COVID, when you just seen a lot of momentum just come into a lot of smaller microcap names. And, that could there's obviously that's bad and good at the same time. You just hope that some of those folks are getting involved in microcap for the right reasons and not, just purely momentum and trading reasons.
Yeah. It's fascinating to me because, in the last, I was just on Charles Payne's show and talking about, why the kind of the retail boom and how there's been just so many more retail investors out there. And that's really what drives the microcap market. So there's this equation that keeps going through my head, and I'm trying not to be self-serving about being microcap media and whatever, but like where clearly you would think that because of all these new retail that are out there drives microcaps. There's clearly that's microcaps is where a lot of them can kind of gain an edge. You would think that, some of the mainstream, and giving credit to Charles, he's probably one of the few that actually even gives, some kind of spotlight on microcaps. You would think there'd be a bit more, rather than just the same damn conversation about Apple and, Facebook, that was kind of a big deal yesterday with Meta and stuff, but you would expect there to be a little bit more, coverage just because that's really what the average retail investor, I would say, is kind of starting to look at, especially some of the younger folks.
Yeah. Well, I think Mike hit on it already. It's like a lot of the news media is driven by dollars. And, for example, like if you were to put small business in 3 buckets, the first bucket, venture capital, the second bucket, private equity, third bucket, microcaps, venture capital, private equity, all over CNBC. They're loved. Why? Because KKR is involved there. You have big firms, VC, everybody loves it. Why? Because Mark Andreessen is on there all the time. He manages a multi-billion-dollar fund or Sequoia or whoever you want to mention, Benchmark. These are big bulge bracket VC funds that have lots of money, that are involved in these names, and they're darlings of the financial media as well because of it. And it's really weird when you think about that, because microcap's the same thing as what they are. It's just that these companies just happen to be public. And it's really also odd because, it's microcap is almost viewed as riskier, even though there's at least some liquidity, than those other two, which have no liquidity. So it's really interesting when you kind of dive into that. And because of that, it's also the advantage of small microcap companies, is because it's probably the only one of those 3, and perhaps the only place in the world where the small retail investor has an advantage, because the institutions literally can't and won't invest in these small companies until they're larger and more liquid. The institutions are kept outside the city gates. You're on the inside, where everything else is the opposite.
It's funny you bring up the idea of risk, and not to say, look, I think there's a lot of interesting things going on in crypto and blockchain and stuff, but like, it still blows my mind, when that gets more coverage than, anyways, that's a diatribe for another day. But anyways, so I think we're at the point now where I want to go through some of the Twitter Q&A. You guys ready for some of these questions? Really got some hard hitting ones here. So I hope you guys are ready. So this is a good one from at Ryan Grayul. I apologize if I mispronounce your last name, but he asks here, how do you guys think about share dilution? Is there such a thing as good dilution when a company is trying to hit growth mode?
Well, I guess I'll take the first shot at it and let Ian finish up. So first of all, when I invest, I tend to avoid companies that need to dilute, just because it's trickier being involved in a company that likely needs to dilute. But there can be occasions where I'll invest in a company that I know is going to need to dilute. And, it only makes sense to me if the company is going to need the money for a good business reason, and it really enables further growth. So it's Ian was talking before about investing in profitable companies, and that's where I try to start with, and that's where most of my investments are. And I try to avoid those that require financing, but companies need financings. That's part of the reason why we have the public markets. And so it can make sense to invest in a company that needs a financing, but you got to be really careful there.
Yeah, I think you explained that pretty well. I mean, it all comes back to why are they raising money, and if that's a profitable reason or not, if it's accretive on a per share value, the reason they're raising money, whether it's an acquisition or for whatever reason, or making an additional investment into their core business. It's as a microcap investor, your biggest risk oftentimes is dilution. And all we have is the history to look back on. And even when you're looking at acquisitions, I mean, most microcap acquisitions fail to be accretive. And so you just kind of think about that when you think about companies raising capital, and even when they make acquisitions, to really look at what they're acquiring and see if it's really going to be accretive to them in the long term.
Got it. All right. So our next question that I got in from at Nouse8UT1, I'm call him Joe. Thanks, Joe.
You're offending all of the people.
I know. I'm really doing horrible here. So his question is, in your experience, do companies sometimes pay for management to buy stock just to increase SP because it is nearly universally accepted as bullish? What do you guys think there?
I've never really heard of that before. Have you, Mike?
I've never heard of it. I mean, there's a few times where I've seen things that, where you see like every member of the executive team buying stock, where, I suspect maybe that's happened. But I think people are smart enough to know that if every member of the management team is buying $3,000 worth of stock, that's probably window dressing versus the CEOs, investing 50,000 or 100,000. That says a lot more than 8 executives, 3,000 each. So, I mean, sure it happens at some level, but I don't think it's, I think it's the exception more than the rule.
I know a lot of investors really put a lot of pressure on management teams to buy their own stock. And I've always not really agreed with that, because you want to find the management teams that do that genuinely themselves on their own right. So even I run into that quite a bit. We're like, well, why aren't you buying stock? They put pressure on them to do so. And so the guy or gal goes out and buys $2,000 worth. So, who cares,
Yeah.
And even if they did, and even if it does matter to them, it's like, you want to see them actually initiate that on their own, genuinely, not because they want to appease some shareholders that are short-term minded.
Yeah. Hey, Mike?
I was to say, the other thing too is a lot of these executives have most of their life savings in this microcap that they're in, and it is very difficult for them to sell because of the opposite reason. People are like, oh, why are you selling? Get all concerned about that, and so oftentimes they're only or their main opportunity to exit is when the company is sold, and that might not be for 20 years or ever. And, meanwhile, they have a life to live. They might have a house to buy, kids to put through college, what have you. And so, so yeah.
Yeah, that was going to be my other follow up too to that is, one on the one side is bullish. It's bullish to see, management going in and doing open market purchases, but at the same time, this idea that it's bearish when you see, insiders then selling as well. And, it's interesting sometimes when you see on sometimes like in MicroCap Club, you see folks say like, hey, the guy, he's redoing his house, like needs a little bit extra cash flow. Like he's held the stock forever. He's still has a very meaningful position in it. It's okay. But I mean, you don't sometimes find out information like that unless you have, only in microcaps could you potentially find out information like that because you have access to management, which actually leads into my next Twitter question from Joe. He asks here, where do you often find the best info outside of accounting statements? Management, customers, employees, former employees, competitors, other. That was a good amount of options right there. Okay. What do you guys think?
One of the things I've been doing the last few years that I get a lot of good information from is actually trying to locate and talk to the one or two other large holders of that company, because they've usually lived and breathed that company for a lot longer than obviously I have if I'm new to it. And so they usually know where the skeletons are buried, or things they have, or issues they have problems with, or the 10 other conversations they had with the CEO over the last 2 years. They can really bring you up to speed on what the reality of the situation is. So I find that's a really good tool to use, is trying to locate some other investors that are in it and have been in it for a long time, and just talking to them about it.
I think also just one of the best resources I've had is just doing web searches, and you have a question, maybe you Google something about a competitor, or find a competitor and see how they're doing and see what they're saying about their business. But all those places that were mentioned in that question are places that are good to find, in very interesting nuggets of information. And sometimes, it's just a matter of finding one nugget somewhere that can really make the difference and lets you know that some idea is really good. So, what I guess I would say is, for most investors, they should employ as many of those sources as they can.
Very cool. All right. So here's another question that came in from Trey Henninger. What's up, Trey? Literally just on the pod a couple of weeks ago. This is very cool. All right. Trey asks, how much money should someone have before becoming a full-time private microcap investor? Okay. I leave it to you.
I think Mike and I did an interview or a podcast back in the day on this subject. I think it's on our site. Yeah, that was probably back in 2015, Mike, maybe. Do you remember that one?
I think there's a couple of I think we did 2 of them sort of on the topic. But I mean, not just this part, but they talked about being a full-time investor.
Yeah, I think Mike would agree with this, and he can give more detail, but I think it's a very personal decision. It's based on, where you live, what your spending habits are, if you're married, if you have kids, what your expenses are, basically, and what you believe is a normalized rate of return you can expect, over the long term, and put all that together. For me, when I made the decision, I'm a big fan of worst case scenarios. So when I made the decision, like 2009, it was, what about a capital would I be able to have where I could sustain 2 down 30% years, and it wouldn't influence my investing strategy. And so I kind of backed into the number there. And when I was full-time, I was still single, and so my expenses were next to nothing. I could live on Taco Bell and whatever, but that's kind of the way I backed into it. It was kind of like in a worst case scenario. Mike, what about you?
I think all the stuff you said was spot on. What I might suggest is, maybe you need a number like 10 times what you expect your expenses to be. And you have to factor into that, if you're single, if you're planning to get married, those expenses, I think all of us here can say those expenses are going to go up, right? As kids come along and, they don't eat for free, and they have medical expenses and stuff like that. So
they think they do.
Yeah, right. Oh yeah. Yeah. Wait till they become teenagers. I'm not talking about how much they eat, but what they think about, how much.
And Mike has 6 of them. He knows.
Yeah. I have 6 kids, not 6 teenagers, but yeah, I get there with teenagers. So you got to think of what the right multiple is on that number. And as Ian said, it comes down to a personal decision as to what you're comfortable with. And, and also, perhaps if you have a backup plan, how that might feel with a backup plan, and maybe another thing to add to that is where you are in the market cycle. Is it might feel easier to make that decision when the markets have been roaring ahead for a number of years, but that might not be the safest time to do it. So it really is a personal decision, but I think all the factors that we talked about just have to be sort of mixed in, and, an individual has to figure out what they're comfortable with.
Yeah. You just have to be really conservative, in what the future holds. Like Mike and I kind of roll our eyes sometimes, in unison, when we see people talking about becoming a full-time private investor and using I think I'm going to make 35% a year, on this capital. And so I only need, this amount. And we're just like, it's, it's better to be very conservative, because the goal as a full-time investor isn't just to support yourself, but also to grow the capital on top of that. So you're going to have to pay bills, but you still want that nest egg to grow alongside paying those bills. So it's really hard. I mean, it's hard in the down times. Mike and I've been through it, a couple times. And it's not easy. It's probably one of the things where I tell people where I'm not quite as forceful as maybe I used to be, it's not a bad idea to find a job that you love to do that gives you the autonomy to invest, the way you want to invest, but find a job that you also love to do that maybe pays less, but provides you sort of that backstop of income and insurance and all that stuff. There's nothing wrong with that either. You can do this somewhat, on a part-time basis if you work hard at it.
Mike, sorry, you were going to add something to that.
Yeah, I think also another thing you have to be careful with, Ian was talking about, people using like, oh, I'm going to get this return. As the amount of capital you have grows, it becomes increasingly harder to have outperformance, especially big outperformance, because, you're going to think about diversifying. Right. And so I would caution people to be very careful about looking at what their historical returns have been and projecting forward. In addition with that is you might be projecting near a market peak, and then, it's going to be hard to have, you can beat the market, but, it's hard to have really good performance when the market is down.
Yeah. And just to, reading between the lines for everybody listening here. So basically, if you live in LA, that means like a studio apartment for at least like 5 years, maybe 10, if you really want to outperform beyond market peaks, right? Like studio, maybe away from the beach, I think makes the most sense.
Basically nowhere where you live, Bobby. Yeah. That's why I live in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, surrounded by Amish people. It's like we can live on $100 a month. So
there is a big concentration of full-time microcap investors, believe it or not, in the Lancaster, Philadelphia area. Yep. So there's something in the water there, apparently.
Cost of living matters, man.
Good stuff, guys. Well, those are all my questions that we have from Twitter, and then from stuff that I have prepared. I mean, closing thoughts. I mean, is there anything that you're looking ahead, thinking about the future of MicroCap Club, microcaps in general? Have you thought about what's next? Just at all? I'd love to hear your thoughts there.
Maybe the one place we're probably going to evolve here quickly is, we always define microcap as sub 300 million market cap. And the funny thing is, Mike and I were talking about a couple of weeks ago, and I said, it's been sub 300 million since 2011. Probably on an inflation adjusted basis, the definition of microcap would probably be, 400 or 500 million, by now. And so we'll probably be raising that kind of threshold of microcap up to probably at least 500 million here in the near future. For those people. And, I think that'll benefit everybody. But in regards to, in general thoughts, I think we've talked about it ad nauseum, but, I believe microcap is one of the best places to invest, in the world, in any area. If you're a retail small investor or large investor, it's probably one of the only places where you can get an edge because institutions can't invest in these companies. Some of the best investors ever started down here, Warren Buffett, Peter Lynch, Joel Greenblatt. Some of the best companies ever started as microcaps, whether it's Walmart, Netflix, Celgene, all these companies were microcaps. It supports a big, broad part of the economy. I think it's 2 or 3 million jobs just here in the United States are employed by microcap companies. So it's important to the economy. So I think it's a validated investment class where if you're willing to put in the work, first focus on the profitable companies, don't get enamored with the story stocks. I think it's a place that you can, outperform and have a lot of success.
Very good. Mike?
I think Ian pretty much hit it right there. I don't think there's much I could add to that.
Yeah, that was pretty good. That was pretty good. And so that's a great place to end it, guys. Again, congratulations on 10 years with MicroCap Club. I hope and pray for 10 20, 30, 40 more years of MicroCap Club and continue expansion, more folks getting eyeballs on it, more subscribers, because as Ian just so eloquently put it, this is, I would agree. Like I said, I agree with everything he just said, but it is the best place to not just get your start, but to really grow and accumulate wealth. So with that, guys, where can people go and find more information on you, follow you? Obviously, microcapclub.com, but Mike, where can people go and follow you on social media?
I'm on Twitter, Mike DD King.
Very good.
And you can follow me at Ian Cassel on Twitter, and you can find both of us on MicroCap Club.
Very good. All right, guys. Thank you so much again for doing this and for everything that you do. And look forward to the next chat.
Thanks, Bobby.
Thanks, Bobby.
Thanks, guys. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not an offer or solicitation of an offer to buy or sell securities. SNN.Network, SNN Inc., and the Planet MicroCap Podcast and the representatives are not licensed brokers, broker-dealers, market makers, investment bankers, investment advisors, analysts, or underwriters. We do not recommend any companies discussed. We may buy and sell securities in any company mentioned and may profit in the event those securities rise in value. We recommend you consult with a professional investment advisor, broker, or legal counsel before purchasing or selling any securities referenced in this podcast.